Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mark. I'm a developer advocate at Prisma, and welcome to What's New in Prisma. This episode, we're going to be talking about the 5.1 updates. We're going to be bringing on a Prisma engineer to talk about some of these improvements we did, what we did behind the scenes to improve a lot of the queries behind the Prisma ORM. And we're also going to bring on Tyler, another engineer, to answer your guys' question live. And we also have a few things coming out of our Discord that we're going to be talking about. So, really great show in store. Please ask all the questions you want in chat throughout the entire stream. We'll be saving them and trying to answer them as much as possible. To join me, I have another developer advocate. You know him, you love him, Sabin. We're going to bring him on right now. Hey, Sabin, what's going on, buddy?
Yo, not much. How you doing?
Good, good. For those that might be new to What's New in Prisma, do you want to give an introduction to yourself, what you do, all that jazz?
Yeah, for sure. I'm Sabin Adams. I'm a developer advocate here. If you've seen What's New in Prisma in the past, you've probably seen me up here. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Sweet. So before we get into the rest of the stream, we want to talk about the 5.1 patch, and we want to talk about the changes that are in them. It was a little bit of a smaller update based on in comparison to the 5.0 patch, which was obviously a lot bigger. I keep on saying patch, but it's release, right? 5.0 release, which was a lot bigger, had a lot more speed improvements and optimizations in it that everybody's loved. We've seen that all over Twitter, which is always great to see. In comparison, Sabin, why don't we talk a little bit about 5.1 and kind of how that continues to move us forward in the optimizations and performance enhancements and things that we're trying to do.
Yeah, for sure. I'll bring up my screen so that we can take a look at the notes.
Sweet.
There we go. Yeah. So 5.1.0, we had a bunch of really good quality of life improvements. But before I get into those, I want to highlight we had a bunch of community contributions, which we always take community contributions, and we get some here and there. But we had a bunch for this release. So I just wanted to shout you guys out in the community. Great job with these. And keep them coming too. If you see something that you want changed, this is an open source project, so feel free to submit issues or even pull requests with some fixes of your own. I won't go through each of these, but all of these people in these individual fixes, great job on these. These were all the ones that ended up getting merged for this release.
Steven, I have a question though about that.
Yeah.
Actually, what goes into us determining what we're going to be merged into a release, and how can people add to Prisma, and what do they need to think about when they're building something to add to the open source community?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so with these, normally it'll start off as like an issue or a pull request, and someone on our engineering team, I'm not quite sure who handles that, or if even multiple people do, but people will typically take a look through those issues and keep an eye on those. And if any of them are something that we feel fits with our product vision and where we see the ORM going, we'll leave a comment on there, or we'll get in contact with the author and just let them know, like, hey, we are going to go forward with this. The specific process, I guess, is I'm not quite sure what it is, but it's, I'd imagine, just similar to any other open source project where you submit PRs and we'll tell you via comments if where we're going to go with it.
Yeah, that's great. I was just more curious for myself personally. I'm sure others in chat might be curious about how they can contribute. So it's always great to see. If there's anybody in chat that has contributed to Prisma, say hi. I'd like to recognize you and see who you are. Why don't we continue with some of the highlights from the patch?
Yeah, for sure. The first one, this one's really big and very cool. I know a lot of people are excited about this. I saw Adrian from CockroachDB was tweeting about it. We have been working on query performance and making the queries that we run through Prisma more performant, possibly running less queries, and just writing the queries in better ways overall. And with this release, we had something like this come out. What this feature does here, or I guess what this fix does here, is we found a way to consolidate certain queries when running on Postgres and CockroachDB, specifically around like creates and updates. Previous to this release, we weren't taking advantage of this returning keyword in SQL. So basically, if you wanted to do a create or an update, you would have to run like 3 queries or more, depending on the query, where we were able to take out a couple of queries because of this returning keyword. I'm being vague about this because we are going to have Flavian discuss this in a little bit more detail. We're going to ask him a couple questions about it. But just the general sentiment here is that in CockroachDB and Postgres, you now run less queries when you are doing creates and updates and things like that.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm excited for the getting more in depth with that with Flavian here in a moment.
Yeah, me too. This one's, I mean, I've seen a lot of people asking for, fixes and improvements like this, and it's nice to see that the engineering team's, taking these on and moving forward. And this is just the first of many. I know query performance is on their radar very heavily right now. The last enhancement that I'll mention is this Prisma Studio now supports direct URL. This one's pretty important, and it's important because when you're using Prisma data proxy or like Accelerate or something where you have a connection string specific to the product you're using, what happened in the past is that when you tried to open Prisma Studio, it would read the environment and then it would read the connection string for data proxy or Accelerate, and that wasn't supported by Prisma Studio, and so it just wouldn't work. Prisma Studio wouldn't really work in that case. You would have to manually set your environment variable to the direct database connection in front of the command where you run Prisma Studio to open it up, and that was a hassle. So now what we've got is Prisma Studio will actually read the direct URL that you set in your Prisma schema. That can be pointed to a different environment variable. We've had this property for a while, but Prisma Studio just didn't use it. And this allows you to use Prisma Studio easily when you're using data proxy or Accelerate or any other like proxy string like that.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yep. And this one was one that I know I'd brought up to the team a bunch because as I was using Prisma data proxy and Accelerate, it does become a hassle if you're used to using Prisma Studio. So this is going to be a huge quality of life fix for a lot of people, I think.
Great. Well, Simon, thanks so much for running through this. If anybody has any questions about the 5.1 update, we actually put out another update just a little bit ago, 5.1.1, where it actually fixed some of the bugs that slipped through with this release. So we're always trying to fix things as soon as possible, and especially with you guys finding them, it's always very helpful. So if you have had some issues with the 5.1 release, go ahead and update to 5.1.1, and hopefully those issues were solved. All right, let's go ahead and move into the next segment here, where we're going to talk a little bit more about these query improvements that we did behind the scenes to the ORM, how those basically help our overall goal right now of improving performance. And we're going to bring on Flavian, one of the engineers at Prisma, to talk about that. So we're going to do a transition and we'll be right back with that. Thanks so much for being here. Hello. Welcome, Flavian.
Thank you. Good, and you?
Doing well. For all the people that haven't seen you before, why don't you give an introduction? Tell us what you do, where you're from, what you like to do, all that jazz.
Sure. I'm a software engineer at Prisma. I mostly do Rust these days, working on the query engine. I've been in the company for a couple of years now, and I'm from France.
Sweet. That's are you enjoying being a part of Prisma? Where did you work beforehand, if you don't mind saying?
Prisma has been my first real job.
Oh, great.
Right. I graduated I started as an intern, then graduated, then continued at Prisma for the past 5 years now.
Awesome. That's cool. That's a big achievement, working at Prisma right after school. That's a big goal probably for a lot of people.
That was a pretty nice start.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, we're gonna jump into the Q&A with you as far as these improvements for the queries behind the ORM, and I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to put up on stream a kind of like a slideshow here where we're going over the improvements and we're talking about what we've done. Before we really jump into the nitty gritty here, why don't Flavion, why don't you give an overview of the main improvement to 5.1 that speeds up the SQL queries? Statement kind of mentioned the returning statement. What does that do? How does that work? Why are we using it now? Things like that.
Yep, absolutely. So in SQL and in most databases, not all of them, so that includes Postgres, CockroachDB, SQL Server, and even SQLite. When doing an insert, an update, or even a delete, you can specify a returning clause, which will basically allow you to return the data that you've just inserted, updated, or deleted. You might wonder why you need that. So for an update, it's pretty obvious, but for an insert, for instance, it might not be as obvious as it is, just like you've just inputted the data that you want to create. So why do you need to even read it? Well, you might have database generated values that comes from triggers or just, that's one example. And so the good thing about that is that you don't have to do a post select after you've done your mutation. That's the gist of returning.
Awesome. Okay, that's great. I mean, that's something hopefully it's a lot informative to a lot of people. What in the past, I know this is a bigger improvement, and I'm going to actually switch to the next slide here. Currently, what we were doing before 5.1 is what you're seeing right now. So this Prisma.user create client, Prisma client query that you would run would basically translate into this behind the scenes. And now it has turned into something a lot simpler. Can you talk about the process of this change here? I see returnings in both of these. Yep. What is the main difference here, and how does that work?
So I guess we could probably, I'm not sure if now is the right time to talk about it, but perhaps we can start with wondering why we weren't using it in the first place. Because that will give us a good answer as to what is the difference with before and after. So a while ago, we have decided to rewrite Prisma from one language to another, and that was a quite big effort. On that journey, we had to not only rewrite the product, but also support multiple databases. When that effort happened, we have taken the conservative approach of let's say correctness over performance, which is that, as I've just said before, not all databases support returning, and even the ones that do, a lot of them, or some of them at least, have weirdness and differences in the behavior of that statement. And so a lot of the time, what we've decided to do is come up with an approach that we were sure would work for all databases. That made it a lot easier to rewrite the product. It gave us a lot more confidence to evolve. And also, one thing that we often kind of forget is like we support arbitrary nested mutations, which a lot of ORMs don't support. And these are pretty hard to resolve. When you have an upsert within an update, within a connect, within, it gets really hairy to resolve. And so going with a simplistic approach made it a lot easier initially for us to support all databases, which is like SQLite, Postgres. Initially, there was MySQL and SQL Server. Then we also brought MongoDB, which is very different. So now back to your question, because I don't want to digress for too long. Before, you can see that indeed we were already using returning, but then, so we were doing an insert, and then we were doing a select. The reason we were doing a select is because we were not able to return more than an ID. And the reason we were not able to return more than an ID in the insert is because we had databases, and we still do today, that do not support returning anything more than the ID for the update, and sometimes even nothing. So the approach that we're taking today is to start specializing databases, like use the capabilities that they have individually. And if some don't, then that's fine. But we are incrementally increasing our complexity by conditionally using database capabilities, which we haven't been doing so far. So in the end, since we don't need the post select, it means we don't need a transaction at all. So these 4 queries that you see that we had before are now shrunk into a single one.
Very nice. That was a great explanation of that. I felt like I learned a lot. We're gonna let's move on to the next example, because I feel like showing a little bit. It's not very complex, but it's a little bit different than what we were just doing. Do you want to maybe talk through each one of these slides here and like explain what is happening, if and maybe that might explain a little bit more of what we've changed?
Sure. I mean, that actually touches to one of the topics that I mentioned before, which is the nested mutations that are not supported by a lot of ORMs, and that we've taken I don't know if that was a good idea, but that we've taken the idea of supporting. So right here, we are updating one user, the name of the user, and in that same single query, we are also deciding to update one of its posts. And so post ID 1, and we update its title. That's the gist of the query. Now, before again, and that's where optimizing one update ripples through the entire system, because as you start to think about nested mutations and nested updates, if you manage to save 1 or 2 query per update, then suddenly if you have nth updates, it is nth times the number of queries that we've saved that you get back. So here, once again, before we used to always do a select. The reason is just like lack of optimization, because on some databases, we have to select before we do the update. And the reason is because the update returns nothing. So what we do on MySQL, which is one example, what we do is we select before we update, then we do the update, and then we literally, if the ID was updated by the update statement, then we change that in memory, and then we return that. And that ID might be useful for the next update to come, right? Because they are connected. So we're updating the post of an update. So we need the parent ID in order to be able to update the posts. Turns out, if you go to the next slide where we might have the thing before, it turns out now that we're able to return the ID and even the name, well, we don't need that for select anymore. We can just, once again, do the updates and return whatever we need. If you look at it, there's actually still one query that's not needed here, but that we still have, and we're aware of it. So technically, we do the first update for the user, and then we do the update on the posts. The thing is, by getting back the user ID, we shouldn't have to select the post for the nested mutation. We could, in theory, just pass it down to the next update. These are the things that we're aware of, but the approach we're taking at the moment is to kind of think in terms of levels. Nothing scientific or crazy. It's just there are many, many ways we can perform optimizations. There are many levels at which we can go, and we try to stay at level 0 for now, the ones that will provide most impact. And then as we move on, we will try to gradually increase the complexity and try to refine these optimizations. So that leaves us, in this specific case, with 2 statements that are saved. And yeah, why is that important? Well, because that's latency. Not only are you saving a database per execution, but also the further your database is apart from your application, the more you will save here, because they are literally round trips between your application and your server.
Yeah, that was great. That was a great explanation. I always find it really nice learning about what's happening behind the scenes when you run a Prisma client query and you're writing it like this. Seeing what queries are actually being run behind the scenes helps you know when you're building things kind of what's happening. I thought this was a great example. And Flagon, you kind of hit this already, but how are we going to build upon these changes, right? Like one of our biggest goals right now is performance and improving things for our entire community. You were talking about those levels. What's kind of next? Like, where are we going from here?
So right now we're taking the approach of going pretty broad and staying at level 0 on the topics that we can. We've just tackled returning, for instance, which was one of our most voted issues. One of the next topic that we want to tackle is nested paginations. So when you try to read a relation on, let's say, find mini, whatever, if you paginate and you say, hey, I want to find one user, but I only want 3 posts for either each of my user or my single user. Well, right now we are loading everything in memory and we are paginating in memory, which can obviously be a huge hit of performance. There are, again, legacy reasons why we've been doing that. But that's yet another very quick win that we could do, which can save up to seconds. Because if you only have, let's say, 1,000 posts, that's fine. But if you have hundreds of thousands of them, you only need 3, it is a massive performance hit. After that, we might take on relational filters. We know we are already using some joins, but we're using them in subqueries. Again, these are fairly quick win that we can go ahead and do. And that's kind of the process right now. We've been clustering most of the performance issues and triaging them in a way that that they are sorted by most impact.
Yeah, it's I'm sure a lot of the people in the chat agree. It's exciting to hear like where this will go in the future. I know when you mentioned joins, something went off in my head. That's something that a lot of people ask for. So that absolutely will be a quick win and a good win too. So that's cool.
Absolutely.
I know this isn't quite the time for chat questions yet, but curious about the answer to this question with the returning statement. Does it return fields that you specify like in your select?
Yeah, so it does for scalars, right? Returning can only return the columns of the table that you are either updating, inserting, or deleting. Right now, since we do not yet support joins for relational reads, as soon as your query in the selection set of your query, so say you are updating a user, but then on the result, you also want to select the posts. As soon as you do that, we unfortunately at the moment still have to issue another select to resolve the posts. That being said, if you do not, then yes, the returning clause will basically mirror whatever you've decided to select from your Prisma client.
Cool. Yeah, so T97, if you heard that, if you're using scalars, the returning clause will return those values for you.
Sounds like your kid's excited for it too.
He's hyped in the background.
Well, that was great. Thanks so much for sharing the direction of things, and it's always good to hear from an engineer's point of view and like the people that are actually doing all the hard work, like what's going on, right? Because I feel like as engineers watching, we like knowing the nitty gritty and like understanding why things are being built the way they are or the process that's being taken. So thanks so much for going into that. And hopefully this sheds some light on our philosophy at Prism and like what we're trying to do and how we're trying to solve these performance issues that we're experiencing. And it's all because of you guys, and we're all just trying to do it for you guys to hopefully make your experiences better using Prisma. So Flavian, thank you so much for joining, and if you have any final words, feel free to share them.
Nothing special. Thanks a lot for having me, and have a great day.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being here.
Yep.
Oh, I cut him off. He was going to say ciao, I'm pretty sure. That was great. I always love hearing from the people that know what they're talking about, right? Like he's been doing it he's been at Prism for a while now, and he's been behind the scenes and building all this awesome stuff. So it's always great hearing from him. Yeah,
and that's the cool thing about the Prisma team is that we've got really good team members who genuinely understand and know, what they're working with and what their goals are. And you can tell listening to Flavian speak that he really understands, what the issues are and what the path forward is. So it's always encouraging to hear them talk.
Yep. All right. Well, this next part of the stream, we're going to be going into kind of like a live Q&A, Discord help question answer style thing. You know, we recently launched our Discord server, probably at the beginning of, what was it, June, I'm pretty sure. And in there, we've been doing a weekly office hours. And what that was, it was just kind of a round table inside of Discord where people could ask questions and we would be trying to help them. Well, what we decided to do is to try to take that format and bring it onto what's new in Prisma as well. And hopefully that will, you know, increase engagement into our Discord, but also help a lot broader of an audience, because maybe not everybody's in the Discord, or maybe that will bring people into the Discord because they'll want their answers to all their questions. So what we're going to be doing now is what we call office hours, and we're going to be bringing on another engineer. Tyler, you may have seen him around in a lot of other things. He's kind of the guy that knows everything at Prisma. That's what I like to say. When we're bringing him on, we have a few questions that we've pre-selected for this, but feel free to ask questions in chat. That's what this part of the stream is for, is to be helping you guys solve all of your problems. So I'm going to transition here, bring on Tyler, and then we'll get started. Tyler, there he is. What's going on, man?
Hey, what's up, guys? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound great. Sound great with that new microphone.
Yeah. Good stream so far.
Thanks. Yeah, you know, it's been great hearing, like we said, all the stuff behind the scenes. I feel like everybody really enjoys that kind of stuff. How have you been? You were live recently on Serverless Deep Dive, right? How that
Yeah,
goes?
yeah. So they've been inviting me on. Yeah, it's been good.
I don't know if we mentioned on the Serverless Deep Dive, so I just want to shout you out here. Tyler recently became a staff software engineer at Prisma, so that was really exciting. He definitely deserved it. So good job with that, Tyler. Definitely well deserved.
Congratulations. That's great.
Thank you.
So we're gonna jump into office hours here, and we have a few questions prepared. Let's go ahead and jump into that. This is going to be the first one. This is again straight out of our Discord, out of our ORM help forum channel, and I'm sure the link to our Discord is floating around. But Tyler, do you want to question and the problem this person's having, and then the solution to this?
Yeah, for sure. This one was a really interesting one to me. I linked in the thread here in Discord over to, there was a GitHub discussion around it as well, and Sergey gave a great answer here. But I thought this was really interesting because in this case, a transaction was started, and then a database constraint was violated in one of the mutations that they create in this case. And what was really interesting to me about this scenario is it's kind of subtle here, but when the database constraint's violated, the database throws the error, not Prisma, right? And when the database detects that, it automatically rolls back the transaction before we even get a chance to say, wait, there's a catch happening here. We're going to continue. So the database actually went ahead and rolled back. That initial create didn't happen. But if you look at the logs, it's a little bit misleading because we do issue a commit, like we caught the error, and then we try to commit the transaction, but at that point, it's already rolled back. So we can't actually like mutate the data, right? I just thought this was a really interesting to call out. Sergey's got a really good write-up in the GitHub discussion. But this was one I haven't myself run into before. And then when I saw it, I was like, oh yeah, I can see how that would intuitively work. But for database reasons, it doesn't.
Would it be valuable to pull up the discussion? I can do that in a moment while we're continuing to talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. And for this particular issue, so if I'm understanding correctly, it's not really a bug. It's more conceptually like when things happen when you're interacting with the database from code, right?
Yeah, exactly. This is just database behavior, and Prisma doesn't really step on database behavior in many cases. I do think there's some opportunity here to maybe get something a little bit more intuitive to the user that what happened here and why it was rolled back automatically. That's something maybe we can improve on. But yeah, this is just database behavior that if you were running this just with raw SQL as well, you would run into the same thing.
Interesting. Yeah.
All right, I'm getting the window here. Sorry, that was a little bit ad hoc, but we're making it work. So here's that GitHub discussion that you were referencing, Tyler. This is the main response that you were talking about?
Yeah, I think Sergey summed it up really nicely here.
This is great.
And in this case, there was an alternative approach too that Sergey recommended. Generally, I think that's probably going to be the case where if you find yourself like trying to work against a database constraint, generally don't try to catch it and react to it within a transaction like this. Lean towards one of the alternate approaches like an upsert or something that would prevent the violation from happening to begin with. I actually do this trick quite a bit too, where an update with no fields in it, it's maybe not the most obvious thing to think of at first, but once you see it, it comes up more often than you would maybe imagine. That you can use this trick to say, I want to maybe create this record if it doesn't exist, but if it does, just skip over it and give me the data back instead.
Yeah, that is a good trick, and it actually comes into play quite a bit. One scenario that I had recently for that is I was working with Clerk, and they have a webhook that gets sent when a new user is created. And I found that sometimes that webhook gets sent twice for whatever reason, I'm not quite sure. And I was running into these constraint issues. So I did the same thing, an upsert with an empty update. That way, if it came in a second time, just skip it.
Delivery guarantees are hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So that was like we mentioned, that was straight out of our Discord, out of our ORM help thread. We also have one for Accelerate and Pulse. And in general, you can ask people in the community for any type of help. Like I was helping somebody earlier with some stuff on Railway, and it's a really nice community in Discord. And I think a lot of people are sharing a lot of really cool stuff in there as well. So make sure you do join our Discord, or please ask any questions in chat if you have them for Tyler. Tyler's the guy who knows everything. We're gonna move on to the next question here. And Tyler, why don't we give a rundown of what this is and why we wanted to pick it out?
Yeah, this one, catching up on my notes here. Yeah, this was a really interesting one to me too, because of the use of the every in a nested relation, which I thought was interesting to point out. I've seen a couple of times where this comes up, where there's a disconnect, I think, between what users maybe expect every to do, in particular for when there is no related data. So like essentially that array of role permissions in this case is empty. So every essentially behaves the same way as JavaScript's array.every does, where you can pass like a callback in, right? In that if the array is empty, it's always truthy. So in this case, if that role permissions relationship, if there are no related records, then that outer permissions model is going to return all the things with no related records, because it's always truthy, right? So I thought this was an interesting one to call out. I don't know if we need to dive like too deep into it, but I'll have a longer write-up maybe to respond on this question. There's a couple ways to pivot this. One thing that you could do is add a sum into that relationship with like either the same role ID or just an empty object. That will trigger the query to put in a essentially like an exist type of check in addition to the every. So that'll catch that like at least one record exists and all of them match this condition. That's one workaround. But the way I would actually suggest in this case to get what the user is asking for in the raw SQL query here is to pivot it. So if you flip role permissions back onto the thing that you're querying first on the model, and then filter it by the role ID, and then include permissions, you'll get something a lot closer to what the raw query is here.
All right.
Nice.
Yeah, you responded. I remember you sent me a solution. I don't know if you wanted to share that, but and at least in the Discord channel, we'll be sharing that for sure.
Yep, I just posted it right now.
And the Discord.
So just understanding what this query is doing, looking for all permissions where the role permissions, where basically every related role permission has that role ID. Is that right? Is that sort of what?
Yeah, and I think based on the raw SQL, what I'm inferring here is that they're really trying to find all the permissions that a user would have, given that the user has a specific role ID associated to them. Which actually the every doesn't really fit perfectly in this case, because if a permission was associated to more than one role, then that every is going to fail every time on this, right?
Right.
So I think pivoting it in this case to filter on role permissions first gets something that is more in line with what the user is looking for. Where the original query, like I said, intuitively it might seem like it's doing that, but there's some subtleties to every that throw that off.
Gotcha. Cool.
Right. Yeah, I always the insight that you have and other people that work behind the scenes is extremely valuable. So it's always great hearing the solutions that you guys have that I might not think of or Steve might not think of.
Yeah, another good recommendation here, as I was actually verifying this myself, I always turn on the client logging whenever I'm testing something locally. You can enable logging. Maybe we should share a link to the docs to that. But if you log the queries, that's a fantastic way, especially if you're a little bit comfortable with raw SQL. You can compare your Prisma query to what the outcome was, and get a rough idea of if that's what you were exactly looking for out of the query you wrote.
Great. All right. Well,
Posted a
we'll
link
move on to oh, that's the link.
to configuring logging. Yeah.
Great.
Thanks, David.
Well, we'll move on to the next. You guys have any questions? This is
Tyler, is he breaking up for you?
Yeah, Mark, you're cutting out a
breaking.
little bit for me too.
Yeah.
Saban, why don't you take over for a second here, if you don't mind?
Yeah, for sure. What I think Mark was going to say is that if you have any more questions, please put them in the chat. In the meantime, though, we have some more to go through. So pop up the next one. I think it's in a slide.
I did it.
There we go. Yeah. So how do you handle large mutation queries that you just want to fire and forget without caring much about the result? Right now, all queries done with Prisma need to be awaited for the to take place, which is problematic for queries that are really big or happen too often.
Yeah, so another subtle behavior of the client. So the Prisma client does batching to try to optimize some use cases in particular. Find unique is one of those you can read about on the docs. But in doing batching, when you first run a Prisma query, it doesn't actually run the database query just yet. It waits until the query is awaited or calls .then on it. Essentially, like that's the signal that, oh, it's time to run this query now because the user is looking for the data result. And that lets you optimize like batching that way without having to actually do like a lot of like manual batching of those things on your side. However, if you just run a query and you don't await it or you don't add a .then to it, that actually won't run because you haven't waited for that data to come back, which is the signal to Prisma that it needs to execute the query. So that's a subtle thing that is kind of easy to miss sometimes. What I would suggest in this case, if you want to do a fire and forget, and you don't want, in that case, to await the query because that would block the task that you're in, add a .then with a callback to it, and that will trigger the query to run. I would also suggest that from the perspective of, I would typically log that the query at least succeeded, if not some amount of the results there, and add a .catch to it so you can also log if an error happened. Because another downside of this is if you do a fire and forget and you don't have a catch attached to it, you're going to completely miss any kind of errors that would have happened. And that can lead to really subtle bugs in your code where you just don't have a log that the thing failed at all. So yeah, in this case, I would add a .then and a .catch, do some logging there just so you get a signal that it succeeded or failed. And that will also cause Prisma to run the query in the background.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was going to use sort of the example of like loading up a page or something, for example, on Vercel, incrementing a view count. This would be one of those things where you don't really care about the result. You just care that the database gets updated. So yeah, adding a .then, .catch is good. And like Tyler said, the .catch is important because if it is broken, even if it's not breaking your page, you want to know what's going on. So it's always important to have those checks going on there. You don't need to like throw an error to the page or throw an error from the response of the API or whatever is going on there, but you need to at least know what happened.
Mm-hmm. I think you touched on something else there that is worth calling out. The deployment environment is also kind of particular about this, that especially if you're running in serverless and you fire off a really large mutation like this in the background, some runtimes might see that the request has finished, and they might try to just terminate the process, even though you have this thing running in the background. So it's important to check with your runtime too, and see if they have a way to sort of signal that you have a background task running and not to terminate that just because the request is done.
Yeah, for sure. And then another suggestion that I sort of thought of when I read this, and Tyler, tell me if you think this is a good suggestion or not. But what I've done in the past is if I have really large mutations that I know are going to take up resources on my server, that's a signal to me that I might want to spin up a serverless function that handles that request. Then within the code where I would have run that request before, I could just do a fetch to that serverless function, and it'll handle running my thing in a completely separate machine. That way I'm not using resources where I'm working.
Yeah, that's a good idea too. That also lets you kind of separate responsibilities out and test that sort of side effect, just by doing like an HTTP call to that endpoint or something like that. Another good use case here is, depending on what tools you have available, is something like a queuing system. We use that a lot internally for the Prisma data platform to do like side effect reactions like this, where we can like push a message into a queue. We use Cloudflare queues for that. And in that case, we get a really quick latency response that we confirm that the message reached the queue. And then it has a nice retry mechanism in the backend. So if that side effect operation, like that large mutation in this case, were to fail, it can safely like retry it without having to do a bunch of orchestration retries within the this asynchronous sort of background task from the request. So yeah, if you want really good reliability there, look into a queuing solution.
Awesome. And I think that's all the questions that we had like pre-planned to go through. Let me scroll through the chat, see if there's any more questions that I missed, maybe. Doesn't look like it. Chat, if you have any more questions, feel free to put them there. In the meantime, Mark, how's your internet doing? You back?
I don't know. I'm afraid to talk.
Oh, no, you sound good.
Okay, cool. Yeah, my it's weird. So I live in a kind of a tourist area, and during the summer it's really bad, like because there's a lot of people using the internet around here. So it's every now and then my internet will just like nosedive, and there's nothing I can do about it.
I see a question from Ayush. When are joins coming to Prisma? So there's a couple things to consider with this answer. First, just without context of where the question is coming from, and for clarity, you can already join relational data right now, but I think what you're referring to is under the hood, when will the actual join clauses be used? That was discussed a little bit earlier on the stream. So afterwards, if you want to go back and take a look, we had Flavian on, and he sort of talked about the future of where query performance is going, and that's definitely on the roadmap. We are actively working on that stuff. It's high up on the ORM team's radar, and I think I'll try to find it after I'm done talking here, but there's a bunch of GitHub issues, and there's a couple of them that are pretty large. If this is a feature that's important to you, go give it a thumbs up, because that is how we prioritize what we work on next. We want to make sure we're giving what the community wants first. And then I see other questions coming in. I'm going to go get that link. So maybe Mark, if you can read through those ones.
Sure. Yeah. If in here, is there any update on the post on the support for this? Tyler, I don't know if you have an answer to this or not.
I'm not sure on this one. Sabin, do you happen to know? I would say the best place I would know of is to go look at the GitHub issues related to this. I know there are at least a couple.
Yeah, that would be one where probably looking through GitHub issues, like you said, would be good. I have heard a little bit about this. I don't know right now that there's any effort to get this working just built into Prisma, but I do know that I've seen people working on client extensions that allow this. PostGIS support is possible through Query Raw, and if you wrap that in a client extension, you can give yourself a really nice API to do that. So you might look on GitHub to see if someone has built a PostGIS extension already. If not, that would be a good one to take on. So general sentiment, it's possible. It's not going to be built into Prisma anytime soon, as far as I'm aware, unless, of course, you create an issue and get some people to thumbs up it.
That is the power of client extensions, though. You can add your own functionality, which is great. We actually put out a video recently where Sabin actually demos an entire creation of the client extension, and that could check our kind of guide on how to build them.
Yeah, and if I can do it, you can do it. So they're pretty simple. The API for it is very nice. If you have questions, feel free to join us in the Discord and ask. I'd be happy to help you out where I can there.
T97 has another really great question. Keep them coming. State will the return created data? I'm assuming he's referring to changes that we did behind the scenes for our queries. I don't have an answer. Maybe Tyler.
Flavin would have been the person to answer this one. I haven't tested this to check yet. But T97, I would maybe ask that in our Discord channel if you join there, and we can definitely follow up there on this.
Yeah, Joe, he's having issues with his internet. There is a video. I think it was the What's New in Prisma 2 episodes ago.
If you can hear me right now, I'll find it.
Okay, yeah, he'll find it for you. But yeah, it was a demo that I gave where we just walked through building one. So it gives you the general layout. And the one that I build is not super complicated, but it shows like all the different features you would need probably to build a PostGIS support extension. This is another question that kind of goes along the lines of what we're talking about. Any plan on adding some sort of model hooks? The current middleware is kind of messy, especially when working with along with extensions. I think the closest we're going to get to model hooks is the extensions. Within the extensions, you can extend specific models, and they basically give you all the power that we had previously with middleware, except wrapped up into this new extensions feature. So on each model, and even as granularly as down to each individual API function on each model, you can basically intercept what's going on there and add your own custom logic.
I would also suggest if you have a particular use case that you're trying to solve and you're finding the extensions aren't working for you for any reason there, raise an issue on GitHub or mention it on Discord. We're happy to take a look and help you out, and it helps inform us on what we can do to make client extensions even better.
Yeah, and then if anyone's interested in learning about client extensions and seeing that demo, this is the link here if you want to get started.
Also, I think we missed one on the future of React and Next.js with server components.
Where's that one?
I was just above the model hooks.
How well will Prisma work with the future of React and Next.js with server components? So there's demos up there right now of people using Prisma along with these. To be honest, I haven't been as in the loop with server components as I probably should be, so I'm not quite sure what the state there is. Tyler, do you have more context into this than I maybe do?
Not a lot, but I can share that I've seen chatter in our internal Slack about testing with server components, so I know it's on our radar. I don't know exactly what the status is of it. I do think there are certain cases that do work. I think the edge scenarios, if you're using like the edge runtime from Vercel, for example, I know we have things we're working on there to make that better. But yeah, I know we're talking about it internally.
Yeah, I will say if you're interested in looking more into this, you should check out Stephen Tay. He does a lot of the example projects at Next.js, and I know he uses Prisma for the large majority of those. And a lot of their focus has been on server components. So I'm sure there's good examples there to look at.
And I'll come back to too, if you try it and it doesn't work well for you, check out Discord or GitHub, raise an issue there. We can have some conversations there about it.
Yeah, for sure. This is a good question. This is one that I've seen a lot throughout my career here at Prisma. When will Prisma support multiple files to build your schema? This is something we talk about regularly. It's obviously something that the community wants. The reason we haven't done it yet is because once you get down to how this will fit into our ecosystem that we have with introspection, with migrations, with all of these different things, it becomes a little bit hairier than it seems on the outside. We've had a lot of community members build solutions on their own that allow you to build your Prisma schema in multiple files. Most of those won't handle distributing introspected models after you've split up your file and you do an introspection. Handling where all those different models should go is pretty difficult. But there are a couple of good community projects out there that I've personally used and I have found cover most of my use cases. I could try to find some links after answering this question, but for now, this is not something that we support. It's something we want to support, but we're still defining what that looks like. And I'm going to go find the links to some of those community projects. I think, though, Tyler, this might be a good question for you to take a look at while I get those.
Yeah, Prisma support for edge environments like Vercel edge functions without using data proxy. Data proxy is our solution for that today. We also have accelerate and early access as a way to do that. But we are looking at how to make the Prisma client work in these edge environments. Previously, there was a lot of challenges with how to do a TCP connection to the database. A lot of the edge environments are getting that support now. So I know we're looking into it. I don't have an update on like when that will land or what the exact status is of it. But there are several issues on GitHub regarding this with a lot more detail about where we stand on it and how we're considering it. So I don't know if you have a more in-depth update than I do on that.
No, I think that's great. I think that's pretty much the story right now. I'm posting a link in the chat, splitting Prisma schema files. This is a link to the issue focused on splitting up your Prisma schema files. And within this issue, there's a long history of chat where you'll see a lot of different suggestions and community built projects that handle this. So feel free to take a look there. Great questions, chat. I am enjoying this, so keep them coming if you have more.
I apologize. Very afraid my my internet is out, so I'm trying to stay still. So if it does go out, at least it's like a picture.
You just don't want us to catch you in a really awkward screenshot, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yep. Yeah.
I'm not seeing any more. Yeah, I'm not seeing any more questions coming in, and we're coming up pretty close on the hour anyway. So I think maybe we should just call it here. And of course, everybody, if you do think of more questions later, we have a Discord and we monitor it pretty closely. I'm scrolling through chat so I can put the link up again. There it is. So if you think of anything else, go to that Discord. We have 3 different help channels: one for ORM, one for Accelerate, and one for Pulse. And just post your questions there, and we'll try to get back to you. So closing this out, does anyone have any last words, anything they want to mention?
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, cool. Great. Nice to have both of you on. And we'll see you guys around for the next episode.
Bye, everyone.